Model says she was tortured and turned into a sex slave by her plastic surgeon boyfriend. Have you heard about this? You've got to tune in to this one. I have affidavits, lots of them. 2 victims, 1 villain. Or is it 1 victim and 2 villains? Are 2 women legally out for money? Plastic surgeon? What's going on here? This is the man they are talking about. The whole thing is based around him. Before we get into it, can you please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel? YouTube is doing this thing where people are unsubscribed and So in 2011, Mace Al-Nakari had started speaking with a man named Amar Mahmood online. Now, this wasn't your typical online find. Like, he was a real catch. Amar Mahmood was actually Dr. Mahmood and a very well-respected man for his work in New York City. Just a really smart guy. Mace resided in Syria, where she had a license specializing in dermatology. Amar lived in the United States with his mother, Dade Nakari, and we'll talk about Dade a little more in a minute. So Dade, Mace, and Amar were all from Syria, so they all had a common community and respect from within the community back home, where they all originated from Syria. Mace and Amar seemed to connect well together, you know, continuously calling and texting each other, as well as Skyping from Syria and the US. Soon, Mace became engaged to Amar, even as she continued to reside back home in Syria. The very long story shortened is that in March of 2011, there was a lot of legal and dangerous things going on back home in Syria. Around this time, her life was said to be in danger. In June of 2013, fearing for Mace's safety, they decided that they were going to move forward together in their lives. So that year in 2013, what they did was they got her out to the United States on a K-1 fiance visa before Amar and Mace tied the knot in Richmond County, New York. However, Mace found herself fully dependent on her husband and his mother. She resided at their Brooklyn address, relying on their full support because she didn't speak English and she couldn't get a job. Additionally, she had no finances of her own. She was fully reliant on her husband and his mother. Now, those problems are pretty big. They're uncomfortable as well, like being fully dependent on someone like that. But Mace found herself paying a very dear price for even marrying Amar, like bigger and worse than the fact that she didn't fit into her new home with him and his mother. On her honeymoon in 2013, her husband got drunk and he raped her. After the terrible and traumatic experience on their honeymoon, Mace developed an abscess on her genital area. She ended up going to her mother-in-law, Dade, and confided in needing a doctor for an examination. Dade Nakari was actually known as Dr. Nakari, who was a board-certified physician specializing in obstetrics and gynecology. However, Dade retired when she was diagnosed with arthritis in 2010. When Mace asked Dade to see a physician for the abscess, Dade told Mace that Mace couldn't afford a doctor without health insurance. Her own mother-in-law took it upon herself to examine Mace. Being dependent on her mother-in-law and her husband, she felt pressured to give in because of her language barrier and lack of knowledge on how things worked within the States. Mace did not even understand the concept of having health insurance in the first place. Rather than asking her daughter-in-law's permission to examine her body, especially where she was examining, on November 12th of 2013, Dade just decided to take Mace down to the basement with no gloves, no medical equipment, and touch her private area with Dade's bare hands. Mace remembers this very traumatic experience as painful and embarrassing. Clearly, Mace felt unsafe. And then on January of 2014, Dade did it again. But this time, Dade told Mace that this was to determine if Mace was safe enough to sleep with Dade's son, Amar. Mace said that she had no direction of anywhere her life was going. It was as if she had just been brought over, married a man who raped her, and trapped to wonder what she was going to do with herself. You know, now she's got these health problems with her body. She had no choice. It was literally Dade and Amar as all she knew. So she had to submit to Dade again. I mean, who else was she supposed to trust? She's out there isolated by herself. But by now, Mace knew like this was not really the help that she was looking for. This did not feel very loving within the family, and that there was just no respect for Mace as a person. Now again, Dade was retired. So what she did was she ended up going to her clinic that was actually closed. So her old clinic, and ended up using an unsanitary and dirty ultrasound probe on Mace's body. Eventually, Amar and Mace would split up. I mean, surprise, right? And after this incident, Dade told somebody in Syria that Mace was actually a hermaphrodite, meaning half male, half female. As a reminder, Mace, Amar, and Dade all knew the same people from back home in Syria. At one point, it was just like this big community of people that everybody knew everybody. So when Mace found out this was being said about her from her pastime mother-in-law, you know, she felt immense trauma. This was so painful. Eventually, much of Syria found out about the rumor from Dade, who obviously held a strong title as a gynecologist in the States. People began to second guess Mace, speculating about her, who, remember, also had held credibility in her community in Syria from her past in dermatology. But now people just talked about her. They no longer really recognized her or remembered her to be, you know, that one beautiful soul that worked very hard for her credibility back home in Syria. Now people just talked about her. They called her names. The same people that she had once loved, helped, called a friend. Her reputation back home tanked, even with her own family. And once that happened, I mean, she just completely feared for her future to ever be seen or acknowledged as a woman after that, for any man to ever love her again or even want to touch her. And sadly for her, she was left feeling shamed because the last man that did touch her was her husband, and the way that he touched her was inappropriate. He raped her. So really, like, what was she going to do? Her aunt, who spoke English, helped her see a real gynecologist where it was confirmed that she is in fact 100% a female. And imagine someone doing that to you and then having it go as far as you having to prove your own gender to clear your name. And then having to use that, having to say, I went and saw somebody, they looked downstairs, yeah, I'm a lady. Having to go clear your name with that, you know, like of all things that somebody could do to you mentally, that is the one thing that you have to go guard yourself against. You have to go prove what you look like in your private area. I cannot imagine. Mace ended up seeing a psychologist for mental health assistance as well. And she unfortunately has had to carry on with a lot. Yes, she was raped on her honeymoon, but then there were the times that he forcefully injected her with human growth hormones. And then there was the time that he threw her out of her home in her pajamas, locking her out until he felt it was necessary to let her come back inside. While Dade was mentally traumatizing Mace and violating her body, Amar would get physical on her and do what he wanted when he wanted to, such as being a married man and staying out all night and deciding he was never going to call his wife. All of this led to Mace's life changing in the worst way until they finally did divorce. But it was Maya Willow Sias's latest allegations against this same man that brought Mace's story to our attention to begin. Maya, a North Carolina native, considers herself a model and social media influencer. At some point, Maya entered the dating world with a man who was in his 40s, but after that, she joined Tinder, continued to look for her match, and she pretty much made the news for being this vibrant, young, attractive woman who was dating a man named David, who at the time was 63 years old in year 2022. Maya declared that this was for her love and that her new man was able to give to her in ways that she really appreciated, that obviously meant a lot to her, like the one time that he bought her a $175,000 sports car. The New York Post had ended up featuring this story, and it was clear who was speaking for them both, and it was Maya. It was clear who filmed and posted about them together. It was clear who was doing the spending and who was doing the receiving in this relationship. But Maya would say that she fell in love within the first hour of meeting, and the two were like mirrors. You know, their energies were meshing really well together, and that they even ate the same things. And she said that was pretty crazy. It's crazy they were eating the same things. I'm not going to comment against the relationship. I know if it were my daughter, I would say what I think, but it didn't last. And the relationship before this one was with a man in his 40s, as we talked about. Well, she said that she liked the guy in his 40s too much, so she ended up ghosting him. This relationship meant a lot to her because she said with 63-year-old David, he gave her what she needed, and that was security. I don't know what else to say. It didn't last, but by October of 2024, Maya filed a lawsuit against a man with some serious allegations, and the man's name was Amar Mahmood. And you know, she's been open about security in her life and that she loves it, but the drawback is that she has photos, okay, that can show something seriously bad happened to her in the time span that she says that she started seeing and living with Amar. Terrible, terrible things I cannot even show here. In April of 2023, Maya met Amar at a yacht party where Amar allegedly tried to get Maya to engage in a threesome with his then girlfriend. Maya says she did not accept this offer, but she was willing to meet up later on a visit to New York City during a modeling job. She says that he love bombed her with presents and extravagant trips. Coming from someone who likes that type of treatment, you know, kind of being spoiled and lavished with gifts and money, I understand why this would be considered love bombing now in her affidavit. Like, I get the difference because a lot of times victims don't know that's what's going on until, you know, the train wreck has passed, until they're out of it, until they're healing and they're able to look back and reflect. So if he really did end up abusing her, and she's saying in the beginning these gifts, trips, and money was love bombing her, then I can see that. I can believe that because that's exactly what it is in the beginning with most abusers. They hook you by idolizing you. Then after he convinced her to move her things from North Carolina to his suite in New York City, that's when things went bad. Seems familiar, not only matching the same actions as his ex-wife, but also how abusers operate. You know, they get their victim in a bind, so the abuser has control within a shared and private space. Maya alleges in her affidavit that he was using ketamine and 2C, which is a synthetic psychedelic drug. It's alleged that he frequently forced her to engage with sex workers. Just as Amar's ex-wife said she experienced with him, Maya alleges that he would use substances, drink alcohol, and keep Maya up at all hours of the night, using her to his pleasure, his advantage, whether she accepted his advances or not. Also, whether she was actually coherent enough to accept his advances. Sometimes she's not even sure if she was awake when these things were happening to her body. One night on June 7th of 2023, it said that Maya woke up, which meant that at this time he wasn't actually keeping her up. He wasn't forcing himself onto her. She was probably finally able to get some sleep. And unfortunately, the reason isn't because he was becoming a better person. It's because he was actually hanging out with sex workers. So he had replaced her with other women. So she was angry and very startled to wake up out of sleep to find that her man was cheating on her. It was hurtful because earlier that night, they had actually gone to dinner together. It was like things were back to good for a minute. So she didn't expect this. She got mad and she demanded that the workers leave. And when they did, and they were alone, he ended up attacking her. He assaulted her. He smothered her with a pillow, allegedly until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was not the same. She was in a lot of pain. That was one of the first things she noticed. She woke up and she's like, dude, ow, like I can't move. And she was banged up. This incident left her with a black eye, swollen shut, orbital bone shattered, head misshapen, and her body was covered in blood and totally bruised up. So he gave her an apology. He expressed his undying love, but would not allow her out of the home to seek medical treatment, which she very clearly needed. He feared instead for himself that she would disclose the beating to a therapist or her physician. So what it said that he did was he imprisoned her within his apartment for over a month. He monitored her location via her cell phone, and he issued grave, deadly threats of severe consequences should she attempt to leave without his expressed permission. She was scared. She feared for her life by this point. Then he abused his position as a medical doctor, prescribing her antidepressants and forcing her to take medical grade ketamine in order to keep her obedient and compliant. It said that she ended up with a shattered eye socket, and worse, Amar once again abused his power as a doctor, insisting on treating it by injecting her with tear trough fillers in her right eye at his medical office. And if you see the picture of her eye, it's like a plum. It's just purple. It's swollen. It's shut. It's bad. Look at me. I don't even know how to express myself properly. It's just so bad. The irony of doing this, saying, you know what, I'll do this myself so I don't have anybody else involved to know that I, a doctor, beat the shit out of this woman. The irony of that is that he did this to protect himself as a doctor. Like, it's not just beating somebody as a doctor. Now it's actually using being a doctor to cover it. And this is just, man. During the treatment, he failed to give her any anesthesia, an industry standard for the procedure. He sadistically injected her directly with a hypothermic needle, causing her great pain and distress. She said that he stabbed me in the face with a needle and I could feel the needle scratching my bone. This is the actual definition of torture. I can't imagine. If you've ever had any work done to your face, it's uncomfortable, even if it's numb. It's super weird. Like, you have a needle in your skin. This is hard for me. I can't even imagine being in that kind of pain from a DV relationship. Oh my gosh. And then having this needle going into my face. Get this. She said that it was very traumatic that her abuser was the only option for her to get care and help. That is exactly what the last affidavit declared over and over. And now this is what this young woman, Maya, is saying. I couldn't even ask for help. He was it. That was all I had. More allegations include that after Maya healed, that he was protected enough to start the cycle all over again, right? Because she's all fixed up and he's had her hidden away and, still using her when he wants to, for sex and making her do what he wants her to do. And then suddenly when all that proof of what he did to her just goes, he's like, okay, green light, go. The physical abuse could start again, and it did. And it went through August, September, and October of 2023. At 6 a.m. on October 20th of 2023, Amar was hosting an after party. At 6 a.m., a doctor. It's time to party at 6 a.m. She caught him with another woman in the guest bedroom, and both he and the woman ended up just beating on Maya. However, once the house cleared out, that usual apology came. He asked her to retract her 911 call that she courageously took the step to make that day. She decided after she was all banged up, and there's a picture, she has a big old bloody lip. She took pictures and then called the cops. And he's like, sorry, just hang up the phone, baby. We can work this out. 5 days before Christmas, on December 20th of 2023, she fled. She actually left the apartment. She took a plane and she went to Los Angeles, California. To me, in my mind, like, this has to be real. Remember, she came from North Carolina, right? Like, she came from North Carolina, and that is so much closer in the east to New York. And she took a plane. She jammed all the way across the United States and went to California. If you ask me, that's a pretty telltale sign. Like, it appears that she went as far away from this guy as she possibly could. And it's said that today she has since managed to resume her modeling career, and she sings and, but she claims that her treatment at his hands has left her with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, insomnia, claustrophobia, and a diminished capacity for sex and intimacy. The affidavit also includes the allegation that he is a sex addict. Since the affidavit was filed, he has been seen out in public with new women, and yet at the same time, conflicting statements here. Some articles say we haven't heard from him. Other articles say that he's willing and ready to fight this. Now, Amar and Dade, his mother, filed a 2019 defamation suit against the ex-wife, contending that Mace had a kitchen sink variety of outright falsehoods against them both. In his court documents, he alleges that Mace was the one with all the problems. It's a whole thing, actually. There's so much in there in that countersuit about smaller incidents that happened, but I don't know, man. I think that she really has faith that she's not making this up and that this really all happened to her, because yeah, it's a $2 million lawsuit. Also, it should be noted that Mace believes that Amar has HIV regarding that abscess that she had. She was actually a virgin, allegedly, when she slept with Amar. So the big question is, one victim, two villains, one villain, two victims. It's just really strange to me that the two women that have filed against him have nothing in common. Like, they're from two totally different places. They are two totally different kind of women. It's not like two women met up, had a drink, and decided like, yeah, no, I think that happened to me, like, oh yeah, they didn't know each other, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, at worst, that Maya might have found his ex-wife's lawsuit and, yeah, maybe mirrored it. I mean, is that a thing? I don't know. Should never happen. The one thing I do want to say is that these were the only two lawsuits that I could find at the moment. And in Maya's lawsuit, she actually says, okay, that's a big deal. He has done this to a lot of women. Okay, so he has like a long history of pulling this off. So I'm wondering how many people are going to come forward against him now. Is this like a Diddy situation where they're like, dude, that happened to me. I just didn't want to say anything because he has all this money and all that. Like, bigger than that, what do you think? Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I will be seeing you next week for another case. Love your spouses, hug your kids, stay safe out there. I'm Chelsea J.